overcome with an almost uncontrollable desire to get ships. So he drove his Chevrolet to the residence where the Turkish general Mustafa Kemal was located, got a meeting with the general, and convinced him to allow the Greeks and others to leave Turkey. You should know that during the last 10 years of the Ottoman Empire, which was 1912 to 1922, 20% of the population of Anatolia died violently. That doesn't mean old age or sickness. They were killing each other. 300,000 Greeks were killed, up to 800,000 Armenians, and 1.5 million Muslim Turks. So they all were getting killed. And the interesting thing about the statistic is that Turkey and the Ottoman Empire had a large Jewish population, but the Jews didn't lose anybody because they didn't have a contentious relationship with the Muslim Turks. It was the Armenians and the Greeks who had the contentious relationship. In any event, it was a great problem, and even the all-powerful Turkish army could not control the violence. And so when Asa suggested removing the minorities from Turkey, Ataturk, as he later became known, and Ataturk, by the way, is a Turkish word which means father of the Turks. Ataturk knew that the proposal by Asa Jennings made perfect sense. Remove the minorities and we'll have peace, then he can establish prosperity. However, Ataturk laid down some conditions. The first condition was, when the ships come into the port, no ship can fly a Greek flag because that would enrage the Turks and that would start the fighting. Well, that's reasonable. His second condition was no men of military age, ages 17 to 45, could leave because the Turks did not want them returning as an invading army. The Greek army had entered Turkey in 1919. To the Turks, that was an invasion, and they didn't want that to occur again. So the Turks were going to hold the Greeks. That turned out to be a very unfortunate condition because many of those men who went to labor camps were never seen again. The third condition was no ship could tie up at the quay because the Turks wanted to control the emigration. They didn't want these men 17 to 45 leaving. So that seemed reasonable. And then the fourth condition was Asa was granted 7 days to remove 350,000 people. Total order. Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, he was later known as Ataturk, knew Asa had no money, title, authority, or resources, but certainly knew of Asa's reputation as a leader in the city of Smyrna. The Turks could not leave these people in the city. It was very hot. There was no food or water or sanitation. Bodies were pressed upon bodies. There were dead people everywhere. The stench was horrific. The looting and raping and killing went on. At night, the United States Navy panned its searchlights over the city to try to keep the violence down. And the Turks announced that all these people were going to have to return to the interior of Turkey where there are no resources to support them. In other words, a death march. Ataturk was a dictator with life or death control over the Turks. His word was law. Now that Asa Jennings had Ataturk's support, he drove down to the port and he went to the Navy and got a boat and a coxswain. And he went to the first merchant ship in the harbor, the Pierre Loti, a French ship. The ship was empty, and he asked the captain, "Will you please take some of these refugees?" And the French captain said, "I'm not getting involved." And he steamed out of the harbor with an empty ship with thousands of Greeks and Armenians crying to be saved. So my grandfather got back in his boat with his coxswain and went to the next ship in the harbor, the Constantinople. The captain was an Italian. And he asked, "How many can you take?" And the captain said, "I can take 2,000, but I need a payoff." He was in it for the money. My grandfather, the Methodist minister, was a practical man. He raised the bride price, and they loaded the 2,000 people. Then the Italian said, "No, I need more money." And my grandfather said, "How can you possibly ask for more money? You've agreed." "Well, we'll get to the Greek islands, and the Greeks won't let these people off. I'll have to take them a greater distance. I need additional passage." My grandfather said, "Then I will go with you, and it'll be my responsibility to get them off the ship." Providence. My grandfather wrote about that event The boat was so crowded I could hardly pass through from the gangway to the cabin, for all along the way, the refugees pressed about me to tell me of some of their family who were not included, to ask where more boats would come, and to ask where they were going. They kissed my hands and my clothing and actually grabbed me and fell to my feet and kissed my shoes. This was too much for me. Upon reaching my cabin, I shut the door and spent some time with my own thoughts and God. In Mitylene, he discovered all these empty ships and all these soldiers. No problem getting the 2,000 Greeks off the ship. So he went to the Greek general in charge, whose name is Frankos, and he pleaded with him for those ships to go save 300,000 of his countrymen. Frankos said no. Despite repeated efforts by my grandfather, Frankos would not budge. My grandfather was livid with Frankos. Coming out of a morning meeting, my grandfather noticed there was a battleship coming into the port of Mitylene, and he went aboard the battleship. The captain was Ioannis Theophanidis, the great Greek hero, who's unknown today. Now, captains in the military is not a greater rank as a general in the army, but there was a history between these two men, and Theophanidis didn't like Frankos. In any event, my grandfather asked for help from Captain Theophanidis, who was willing to help. Captain Theophanidis' moral compass pointed true. So my grandfather then started writing messages on the stationery of the Kilkis. Captain Theophanidis then translated those into Greek on the stationery of the Kilkis, and you can see those in the Fellowship Hall. Then those messages were taken to the radio room of the Kilkis, and they were put into code, and then the coded message was sent to Athens, to the Prime Minister, and then his cabinet. Make a long story short, the Prime Minister said no, you cannot have ships. The Greeks were afraid the Turks would capture the ships and then invade the Greek islands. Finally, out of options, my grandfather sent a message which said, if you do not provide ships, my next message will not be in code, and all of the world will know you, the Greek government, allowed the Turks to kill 300,000 Greeks. That's called blackmail. We have a Methodist minister in the blackmail business. The Prime Minister's knees buckled, and with certain conditions, which my grandfather, of course, accepted, 26 ships were placed under the command of AKJ Jennings, buried here in Cleveland, New York. The merchant captains didn't want to go. They were afraid of the Turks. So they said, well, my ship can't make the trip, the boiler's not working. They had all excuses. So Captain Theophanidis ordered all the captains on board the battleship Kilkis, and he told them, any captain not ready to sail by midnight tonight will be court-martialed, which means they'll be taken to the fantail of the Kilkis and executed. Suddenly, all the ships were ready to sail at midnight. Today, the people of Greece do not know the story. They don't know about Captain Theophanidis. In fact, Captain Theophanidis was kicked out of the Greek Navy for this. And in fact, General Frankos and his friends, who would not participate, would not help because they were planning a coup, which occurred during the rescue. And later, my grandfather's fleet of 26 ships was expanded to 55 ships. Subsequently, King Constantine came back into power in Greece, and Captain Theophanidis came back into the Greek Navy and was promoted to admiral. I'm happy to report that his grandson, retired recently, is an admiral in the Greek Navy and is a friend of mine. And his name is also Ioannis Theophanidis, and the Greeks don't know him either. It's a sad story. And I sent him recently a video movie by MGM called Strange Destiny that you can see on Vimeo.com. And Admiral Theophanidis said, this is the movie the Greek government doesn't want to know about. They are suppressing the truth.